Welcome to McGuire on Wrestling.
What do you guys want to talk about?
Let's give the people what they want. Professional wrestling.
With Mike McGuire.
The happiest Canadian camper in the world.
Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Give me a hell yeah.
Hey, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. Had a really great week. Hope you did as well. Thanks to everybody checking out the show. If you're new here and you're back again, we saw a big spike in listenership last week, and that tells me that A, we're doing a good thing here, and B, people are digging the show. So thank you very much if this is just your most recent time being here, or even if you're brand new. Welcome to what I believe, and this might be saying something, because there are far more successful shows out there. There are far more long-running shows out there, but I truly believe that what we're doing here is something special. I think that as this show grows, as the Team MOW thing grows, we're going to be bringing in more stuff. There's going to be more content, and I think that our intent is coming out. And the intent isn't to make money off of you, at least not directly, not without giving you something for it. You know, The Undertaker just announced that he's launching a Patreon show. So if The Undertaker is the bar for who should be charging money now to be doing wrestling podcasts, we're here for sport. That's what it's about. That's what it's about. We'll find other ways to make this thing make a buck down the road here, but I'm never going to come to you and say, hey, just for doing it, please give us money, because that's not what this should be about. I've based my career as a broadcaster for 20 years now coming up as someone who lets the shows pay for themselves, lets the work pay for itself, and then that way you as the consumer just don't have to worry about it. So that's all we're going to talk about with money today, other than the fact that there are ways you can support the show. The only way financially is through the shop, which you can get at McGuireShow.com. You can get the GWO t-shirts for our friends at the Alternate Commentary Table. And by the way, if you haven't checked out that show yet, you want to meet a couple of guys who are just a barrel of laughs, if I may use such graphic language. But no, they really are. They're a couple of good dudes. They love talking about wrestling. They love broadcasting, and they're really good at it. It's called the Alternate Commentary Table. It posts on this feed every Saturday. So if you hit that subscribe button, you're getting it automatically. And they're a ton of fun. Mitch and Dimitri have become really good friends, and most importantly, they deliver a great show every week. So check that out for sure. We have a small online community that's growing. It's the Team MOW, McGuire on Wrestling Facebook group. If you want to join that, just find us on Facebook, Team MOW and McGuire on Wrestling, and you'll find that page there. Now, there's a page, too. That doesn't really have anything going on it, but the team page does, the group. So go find that for sure. And then, of course, if you want to subscribe to this, you can find us on all your favorite podcatchers. The show's upload on YouTube now, and our podcast feed is at McGuireShow.podbean.com. And if you have anything else you want to know, find me at McGuire Show or email me anytime directly. It goes right to my phone, McGuireShow@yahoo.com. Coming up this week, Sting is calling it a career, but he's not done just yet. The Professor makes a rare wrestling appearance. Could LA Knight be the one to take Roman's crown jewel? Like I said, the Dead Man is getting into the podcast game. Impact Wrestling is switching back to TNA for good. We'll get your thoughts on that. And Dave Meltzer from the Wrestling Observer is here to take us through some of the stories this week. But right now, here are some of the details behind the headlines.
You want to hear the breaking news?
At what will mark a 39-year career, AEW's Sting announced that at next year's Revolution pay-per-view in March, he will have his last match.
The only thing for sure about Sting is my retirement. Revolution 2024 is for sure.
Now, Sting first debuted back in 1985, had runs in the NWA, became a WCW stalwart, the only major star from that company to never leave for the WWE until there was no WCW anymore. Of course, he had a legendary run in TNA wrestling, a brief stint in WWE where we thought he'd be forced to retire, but then, of course, has had this incredible run in AEW over the last few years. We'll have more on the career of the Stinger with Dave Meltzer coming up. Impact Wrestling presented Bound for Glory last night in Chicago. The show was loaded with surprises, including the Call Your Shot Gauntlet match, which featured men and women from all walks competing. The special appearances included Matt Cardona, Sonny Kiss, who has been revealed to have signed with the promotion, Juventud Guerrera, and a returning Jordan Grace, who ended up winning the match and called her shot for the Impact Knockouts Championship. Spoiler alert now, gonna give you some results from the matches last night. In the main event, Impact Wrestling World Champion Alex Shelley retained his title against the returning walking weapon Josh Alexander. Trinity retained her championship against Mickie James for the Knockouts World title. Will Ospreay defeating Speedball Mike Bailey in what was a match for the ages. X-Division champion Chris Sabin defeated Kenta to hold on to his belt. In a Monsters Ball match, PCO defeated Rhino, Steve Macklin, and Moose. And the Impact World Tag Team Championship changed hands as Ace Austin and Chris Bay defeated the Rascals, Trey Miguel, and Zachary Wentz to become the new Impact Tag Team Champions. Lots of other news coming out of Bound for Glory last night. Tracy Brooks was inducted into the Impact Wrestling Hall of Fame.
Thank you for cheering me when you loved me, booing me when you hated me, and thank you for letting this little farm girl from St. Mary's, Ontario, Canada.
Also inducted and making his first pro wrestling appearance in years, the Professor, Mike Tenay, was inducted alongside Don West, who passed away last year.
Always nice to be recognized by your peers for the hard work, the dedication, and from both Don and I, thank you, Impact Wrestling. Thank you, Chicago.
And while earlier on we were talking about how Bound for Glory was a night of surprises, probably the biggest surprise of the night, Impact Wrestling announced that at January's Hard to Kill pay-per-view, the company is reverting to its old name, TNA.
This is TNA Wrestling.
Total non-stop action wrestling. You have some of your thoughts you've shared. We'll get to those coming up later on the show. WWE's Crown Jewel has a main event, and while it may have us already predicting the outcome, LA Knight now has a shot at Roman Reigns and the WWE Undisputed Universal Heavyweight Championship. I think that's all the words in that. There's so many. Either way, that match has been announced to main event the show. Also, on the November 4th card, we know that Seth Rollins will be defending the World Heavyweight Championship against Drew McIntyre. Rey Mysterio will now be defending his United States Championship against Logan Paul. And Rhea Ripley will be defending her Women's World Heavyweight Championship against Nia Jax, Zoe Stark, Shayna Baszler, and Raquel Rodriguez. Billy Corgan is announcing that the NWA has a new TV deal in the works. Now, reports are coming from various outlets that the deal is going to be with the CW in the United States. The cable network is said to possibly be interested in two different shows, a once-weekly airing of NWA Power, and another possible reality show based on the behind-the-scenes workings of the promotion. While this is great news for the NWA, it's also great news for wrestling fans, because, hey, we needed more wrestling to watch. And as I mentioned before, The Undertaker getting into the podcast game. It was announced earlier this week that Undertaker is launching a Patreon for the project called 6 Feet Under with Mark Calloway. Now, it's going to be what they're calling in-depth conversations with the Hall of Fame wrestler. And it's offering 3 different subscription tiers, $5 a month, $6 a month, and $10 a month. The lowest tier will get you access to the episodes, which are going to launch on Wednesday. The other 2 tiers get early access on Monday mornings, and those who subscribe to the $10 tier are allowed to submit questions. Just a reminder, if you have any questions you want to throw my way or Meltzer's way, always free at McGuireShow@yahoo.com or any of the other social media posts that we've told you about before. Then again, neither of us are The Undertaker, so I ain't going to tell him what he can do and can't do.
You got to stream the alternate commentary table. Every single Saturday, it's brought to you on the McGuire on Wrestling feed. I'm one half of your host, Dimitri Karolis, and I'm here with my partner, Mitch Hondras. Mitch, what is the alternate commentary table?
It's simple. It's the perspective of wrestling from the other side of the railing, the real fans.
That's right, the perspective that you need. You might have a little bit of fun, too. The alternate commentary table. Subscribe free now to the McGuire on Wrestling podcast feed wherever you get your podcast.
Shasha!
It's time for the Wrestling Observer Insider with Dave Meltzer, McGuire on Wrestling.
Well, the more things change, the more they stay the same. One thing I'm happy to say is still the same. Dave Meltzer here to join us. How are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Really good, thanks. Interesting week in wrestling, a lot outside of WWE. Of course, they have some interesting things going on as well, but I think probably the biggest one, something people have been expecting for a long time, but it's official now. Sting has announced when he plans to have his last match. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, we've known it for, I feel like well over a year. The idea was that he would work out the contract that he signed, which was going to be at the end of this year. And then he would be retiring at some point this year. And he's actually stretched it a couple of months to, early 2024, right before he's 65 years old. And it's, I'm sure it's time. He did a great job, in the limited amount of matches. I think he had over, something like 20 matches, 22 matches, something like that with AEW. And, did far better than I think anyone expected when he first came in. I think we just kind of thought he'd do maybe 2 or 3 taped matches.
The cinematic style was all we were expecting, right?
Yeah. I don't think we expected. And then he did some tags and everything. He never did any singles, but he worked very hard in the tags. I think he helped a lot getting Darby Allin over. And I think a lot of the guys were kind of thrilled to be in matches with him. And, I think that we'll be, hearing more about whatever his last match is going to be is, what type of a show it's going to be on and things like that. That's the big question. They're going to go for, what city? I think a lot of people think Atlanta, because they're doing Los Angeles in November. So I doubt it would be Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And, last opponents, will they, it's a tough thing because obviously you want to bring in a lot of legends from his career, and there's a lot they could bring in, but the ones that you would expect, the Hulk Hogan's and all that, I don't know if they really would have any access to them because of their contracts with WWE. So, we'll see what happens, but, and Ric Flair obviously being, another one, probably his most famous opponent, I guess, would be Ric Flair. And, it's a long, long career, much longer than I'm sure he ever expected to be in the business when he started, or any of us expected. I think that most of us figured he was going to be done. He kind of had said goodbye in 2001 when WCW folded, like he wasn't really interested in going any further. And then he came back and did some stuff with TNA and ended up with them on a regular basis for years. And when that was over, it was figured he was done. Then he came to WWE. When that was over, due to the injuries, it was figured he was done, and he came back again. But this one's it. And it was funny when he said, like, the last time I retired, I said one thing for sure with the only thing for sure with Sting is nothing's for sure. Mm-hmm. And then this one, his line was, the only thing for sure with Sting is this one's for sure. So, he's been talking about it for a long time, and it's longer than I expected it would be, because I remember when they did the big article on him, whatever it was several months ago, and he said it's going to be sooner than people think. And it ended up being a little bit longer.
That's just it. A 39-year career is what it'll be by the time it's all said and done. And when you look back at that, we talked about it earlier, how he's the only guy that didn't jump as far as big names go back in the WWF, WCW war. He's the only guy that really has called his own shots the way he has to this length. You can say like guys like Terry Funk and Flair and everybody else, but Sting, for the most part, you got to say, minus the that appearance in WWE, really didn't do much that tarnished his image throughout his career.
He had his issues, which he's been very open about, in the WCW days, with where he got very into religion because of some of his issues and everything. He's never hidden from that. But as far as major scandals or things like that, no, nothing. And as far as saying things that are really stupid or embarrassing or nothing like that at all. He's basically been, kind of level-headed guy, who was never, was in wrestling forever. He was a big star in wrestling, but I would say that Sting was never consumed by wrestling, which a lot of the top guys were. It was like wrestling was his job. I think that he could have, gone without it and did without like these pangs of needing to go back. But I think that, he said like, the reason that he stayed was because, it really is fun getting that response from the crowd. And I think at the end, look, if you look at what he did in the last couple of years in these matches, it's obvious that he was not phoning it in. He was not, I'm a legend, I can get away with doing nothing. He did far more than any of us expected. And he hurt himself doing it because again, you go through tables at that age, and it hurts you for months. And I mean, and he didn't have to do that, but I think he did, especially at the end. I think he always took pride in his work, but I think at the end he really took pride in his work, and he didn't want to be that guy who is just like not earning his keep, so to speak. I mean, I give him a lot of credit. I think he was, again, like as far as like a career and everything like that. I mean, he remained a big star, and people remembered him and everything like that. He's a real legend. I mean, he never was he never had the real run that like a Hulk Hogan or Steve Austin or Rock or Cena had, where he was just, or even Roman Reigns, where he was like this mega drawing card.
Right.
But he survived, longer, and to his credit, his body held up, because with most guys, when it gets to that age, it's not the willingness, it's the body holding up. And, and it wasn't, he did flying stuff and everything when he was young, and his body held up until, 64 years old. I mean, his neck is a mess, but he can live with it. I mean, he came back from it. That's what I thought ended his career, was the neck injury against Seth Rollins.
That's what we all thought. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the WWE wouldn't clear him at that point. It's like, you're done. And we figured he's done. And then AEW comes along, and Tony Khan brought him back, and I think he's getting the farewell he deserved. And he didn't get that farewell in WWE. And he didn't get that farewell in WCW either, because WCW just went out of business. And he never really got it in TNA. So I think, and I hope that they really do the Great Muta thing, which Pro Wrestling Noah did with the Great Muta last year, which was one of the most, wonderful things of the year, really, of this year. And I hope that that's the template, I mean, I sent, or I don't know if I remember I sent, or I talked or emailed Tony Khan, but I mean, I definitely contacted Tony Khan right after that final Noah match that Muto wrestled. And I go, this is your template. You know what I mean? Whenever it comes time for Sting, look at this for ideas, because Noah did such a phenomenal job.
It's funny you say that Sting wasn't as big of a drawing card as Hogan and Flair, and that was always kind of the funny thing with Sting. Like, to the diehard NWA fans or WCW fans, if you were in the weeds with it and you were a big fan, Sting was your guy. Sting was the guy who was basically based as the ultimate babyface against these monster heels. I mean, look at his time against Flair. Look at his run against Hogan. They didn't touch for over a year, and they run this incredible.
It was a great build, and it was a terrible payoff.
Well,
people look back on it, for decades, and it was just a terrible payoff the way that went down. And there's a lot of reasons for it, but at the end of the day, that one's Hogan. It really was. That was Hogan. And I mean, he, and it's funny because like a lot of guys would have had great and rightfully so, great resentment, because this was my moment.
Right.
And it never really happened. And the reason it didn't happen was because of Hogan. And Sting, even in his speech, when he mentioned Hogan, and everyone boos because they all know the story.
Yeah.
And he said, no. It was like, Hogan really helped me. And Hogan did build that program up. And Sting did get over. The biggest of his entire career was chasing Hogan. Mm-hmm. And that was because of how hot Hogan was and how well that storyline was put together. It's just the build was an all-time great build. And the climax was an all-time horrible climax.
Well, for those that don't remember, take us through, because again, that build was tremendous. Like, I mean, the fact that Sting just started out silently hanging in the rafters, and eventually, it was a baseball bat point, and that was the match, that was the challenge. And I just remember watching all this and thinking, this is going to be incredible. And then what happens.
Yeah, I mean, they did the biggest non-WWE pay-per-view in wrestling history, and what will be the biggest in history, because that will never be broken, ever.
Right.
And, they did a match, and the idea of the match was that this was Eric Bischoff's idea, or something fed to him. I don't know. I know I heard it from Eric myself and said it was his idea. Mm-hmm. And the idea was that Brett would make his debut, and the referee would screw Sting with a fast count. Brett would come in there and go, I'm not going to let anyone get screwed. They would come back, and Sting would beat him in the middle, Scorpion Deathlock. tap him out. And, there was no fast count. Nick Patrick made a normal count. Brett came in, made Brett look terrible in his debut. Sting winning the title seemed anticlimactic because Hogan pretty much dominated the whole match, pinned him clean, and then somehow it got restarted where Hogan got screwed, and that just threw the whole dynamic of everything off. And then Sting, it was never the same. I mean, they tried with Sting afterwards. He got some title runs and everything, but it just wasn't the same. And, by the end of, by a year later, Sting was even less than a year later. By 5-6 months later, Sting was way surpassed by Goldberg. So he never really got that extended run as the world champion, top babyface in WCW. And, it's just timing. Is whatever happened. And
it's funny. I'm going to be seeing Brett this weekend because we have another Dungeon Wrestling show coming up, and I've been finding all my old WWF and WCW magazines, and I have the magazine that recaps that match. And boy, do they gloss over that finish and make it sound a lot better than it was.
Yeah.
You know what, Dave? Again, Sting. I mean, we're gonna have lots of time to talk about him over the next 5 months here, but definitely a guy who. I think overall, and yeah, he had his problems, but overall is a class act and a guy that's going to be remembered as that matter what.
I consider Sting as a class act. I mean, in this business for that long, not really making many enemies. I can't say none, but not really someone like him. I would say in the 90s when he was on top, there was always the resentment because, he's on top and the company's not doing good. And when you're on top and the company's not doing good, it falls on your shoulder sometimes. And
right.
You go, it could be me, look at these empty seats type of thing. It happened. But I think as time went on, he was in an unenviable position. He was, for much of his career, he was with the secondary brand. I mean, WCW for a while was number one, but it was a short period of time, really. And then with TNA, obviously, they were number two. And then AEW was number two. A brief time he was in WWE. I mean, it really was only a couple matches. And it wasn't, he was over huge because he was a legend.
Right.
I mean, but they did not really they didn't treat him like he was a legend. I mean, when he did the match in Santa Clara with Triple H, because I was at that one and I was thinking Sting's first match, he's got to win. And then he lost. And then he shook his, got hit with a sledgehammer and then shakes his hand. It's like, you got hit by a sledgehammer. Now you're going to shake the guy's hand. You know what I mean? It's like, I just felt that wasn't particularly good. And then I didn't hear the commentary. And then when I watched the commentary later, and the whole commentary was about WWF and WCW, and we all go WCW died in 2001. What, it's like Vince was still fighting some war, and that was the problem. Sting could have been used differently, and we never got the Sting Undertaker match that many people wanted. Vince was never interested in that one. And of course Undertaker would have won, so it's not like it's like a negative thing, but people did really want that match, and it really would have been a big match, and it never happened.
Well, that segues perfectly into what I wanted to talk about with you next here, and that is, we didn't touch much on it last week, but the story now that Vince McMahon is completely out of the creative realm now of WWE. I know you talked a little bit about Ari Emanuel and his moves and perspective ideas, but what is going to be Vince's role moving forward then if he's not in creative anymore and he's not touching the product?
Business stuff, you know what I mean? Like using Vince's name, and Vince, he's got a big rep as far as closing deals. So have him involved in different deals for WWE, international deals and things like that. He's still the guy running the company. Ari's his boss. And this is the first sign ever that Vince has a boss.
Right.
Because before, Vince ultimately was the final arbiter on everything. And Ari had said Vince is the final arbiter on everything having to do with wrestling. And then, the ink was barely dry when Ari said, essentially that Triple H is running creative and you're not. And that's the first time anyone did that to Vince. And I don't know how Vince reacted. Vince has billions of dollars and he's old and he's 78 years old. And but still, he had billions of dollars and he was 78 years old. He fought tooth and nail to get back in and back into creative and everything like that. Not that many months ago. So, and I don't count, after the last thing, I don't count him out in some way, but the difference is he isn't the boss. He is the chairman of the board, but he does not have the control of the board. He does not have the stock control that he had before. So it is a new situation for WWE and for Vince, in the sense that Vince is technically the most powerful guy, but he's not the guy in control, nor will he be. And if for something happens and he is gone, he can't snap my fingers, I own the stock, and work his way back. I mean, if he's gone, he can't make himself come back like he did the last time.
The only thing for sure would be that this time would be for sure. Okay, let's talk about AEW business here for a second. The only slag I can have on the Sting retirement announcement was they did a couple wide shots, and the building was looking pretty hurting. Numbers wise on TV, it's back up. Well, hold on. Numbers wise on TV, things are back up.
Wednesday actually wasn't bad. Last night was the one that was bad. Wednesday was actually one of the better crowds, but they're having trouble drawing. I mean, and there's a lot of reasons for it, but you're number two and you're not a close number two right now in the fans' eyes. And it's just going to be that way. I mean, it's how it always has been. And there's no magic formula. I mean, there's things that they could do. I wrote, whatever it was a couple months ago, like 2 months ago, I think. I wrote a big, long thing, all the stuff I learned from Zane Bresloff and different ideas on what you could do. But a lot of that stuff is not applicable to today. I mean, the media situation is different. You don't have the local radio DJs in its city that everybody listens to. So everything's different. It's very hard to do this. Especially when they don't really have full cards announced and you don't know who's going to be there, and the nature of kind of how they do the shows. It's tough, but Wednesday they got a great walk or a great last 4 or 5 days. So it was okay. But Saturday, last night in Memphis, which we knew was going to be bad, and it was pretty bad. And 3-hour show was too long also.
Yeah, that Battle of the Belt and no title changes again. I mean, these Battle of the Belts are almost becoming notorious for having, was it 1 or 2 title changes, I think, in all of them now, but whatever.
There's been 2. It's just, once they had added Collision, and really even when they added Rampage, I don't think there was any need for Battle of the Belts. I think it's just something in the contract. But the idea of, a 3-hour, I just felt, like the one thing we learned with Raw is how difficult it is to put together an entertaining 3-hour show. But this one, I just thought, after hour 2, I'd say of those matches that they had on in Battle of the Belts, the only one that I sensed was kind of intriguing was Chris Statlander and Willow Nightingale. I mean, the other matches were just, they're not, main guys challenging for the title. I don't think everyone knew John Silver wasn't going to win. Everyone knew Tony Nese wasn't going to win. You really knew Menard and Parker and Daniel Garcia shouldn't win and didn't win. I mean, you could have argued Willow could have won over Chris. She didn't, but you could have argued that was the only real interesting one. We'll find out, but I don't know about the 3rd-hour ratings. I mean, it just didn't feel like anything that would keep you after you already watched 2 hours of wrestling.
That's completely valid. I mean, that's been the problem that Raw, like you said, has had. Even AEW fans that go to TV tapings now, they say, like, once you get through Dynamite, it's a slog because you're sitting through Ring of Honor and everything else. And to have that 3rd hour televised live just shows how much more effort needs to go into the show. But
they need better matches for hour 3. I mean, like, the thing is, the Clash of the the Clash of the, the Battle of the Belts. The Battle of the Belts, to me, should be like a pay-per-view on television. Not quite the pay-per-view, but like pay-per-view quality matches. And as like I said, Willow and Chris could be on a pay-per-view. It's all right. It's not a pay-per-view main event, but it could be. But the other one shouldn't even be on a pay-per-view show. So to me, it's like, what do you need when you've got so much television? And I know they're getting paid for it and everything like that, but I felt for an average viewer, the experience last night was that things dragged. And that's, you just, WWE, that, like I said, that sometimes happens on Mondays too, but WWE will save you a big main event for the end of the show, with the top guys. And they did not do that. They were saving you Matt Menard and Angelo Parker, God bless them. But that's not Seth Rollins and Judgment Day. And that's what we get every, Seth Rollins, Cody Rhodes, Jey Uso and the Judgment Day. We get that every single Monday. And you need something equivalent to that. And we didn't even have, all the top guys. We didn't have, Kenny Omega. We didn't, you know what I mean? We didn't even have all the top guys on this show. We didn't have Max on this show live, really.
Right.
So it's like for 3 hours, you need your A team, all of them.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Raw there, and you also mentioned Zane Breslov. We'll get back to Zane in just a second here, but let's stick to Raw for a second here and segue into WWE. Jade Cargill now appearing on all three brands. Where do you think is the most sense for her to eventually end up?
Well, they teased Charlotte Flair, so you'd say that's SmackDown.
But they've also teased Becky.
Yeah. I think the big match would probably be Rhea, if you're going to build to a big match. So, and then you got Nia, which to me, like her slamming Nia, I don't know anything, but I just think that that would be my intro. So I'm going to say, to me, the place is Raw, but if they're gung-ho on her with Charlotte Flair, then maybe it's SmackDown.
Bianca's back now too. So, I mean, that's
maybe if Bianca's on SmackDown, maybe she's better on Raw. Can you say that? But yeah, you could.
Okay. All right. I just want to throw that out. Now, going back to Zane Breslov, his name came up in Mike Tenay's TNA Hall of Fame speech. And I say TNA because we'll get to the name change in a minute here. But I mean, it was so great to see Mike Tenay at all. Mike has done a great job staying away from wrestling, but to hear him come back and see him come back, tell some great stories. I thought he spoke very highly of Don West and his family, obviously, because, the friendship was there. But as far as seeing him come back, I wasn't sure what to expect with Mike Tenay showing back up, and the love was there always around. And he did mention Zane Breslov as teaching him a thing or two about wrestling in the day as well. Just talk about Mike Tenay for a second. I know you guys are friends and you guys go way back as well, but to see him get some recognition. Mike
Tenay was the inspiration of what I do. Mike Tenay did a wrestling newsletter that I started reading when I was 10 years old. And, but yeah, no, Mike's been one of my best friends forever. And, I cried watching that because, I've known him for so long and everything. And, it was good to see him. I wish, I think he's happy with his life away from wrestling, watching other sports and things like that. The wrestling doesn't, really thrill him or anything like that right now. I'd like to see him in a sense. I think he'd be a valuable addition to any wrestling company because Mike's one of the smartest guys in wrestling. He is one of the smartest guys. And, so someone like that, and he can do a lot of different things. And if he was great announcer and things like that. And he's been offered announcing jobs everywhere. He hasn't taken one. So that tells you something. I always thought get him in AEW or something. That'd be a good mix, but it was not something that he wanted to do. I think if he had pushed forward, he'd been in there. Maybe not. He and Tony Khan talked, and the opportunity was there. I don't think he wanted the weekly grind of flying to New City every week at this stage of his life. And I can understand it. You know what I mean? It's like at the stage of his life he's in. If he came to me and asked me, which he hasn't, but we've talked about some of his stuff.
Absolutely.
But I would say for him, I would probably say, hey, you know what? You don't need the money. You don't need to do it. You don't need that travel at this stage of your life. But as far as having an affiliation with somebody, it'd have been cool if he did. But I think he's happy. He's got his wife and his wonderful woman, and that's the basic situation there.
He looked to me, and I don't know Mike Tenay at all, which, maybe one day you can help me shake his hand down the road. But when it comes down to it, he looked to me like a guy who is content, who is happy, and who is proud of the work he did in the business. And I think
I hope he's proud of the work he did in the business. I'm sure he is. It took a lot to get him to do this. He's been asked, I don't want to say year after year, but many years by Scott D'Amore. When Scott speech, you could tell the respect Scott D'Amore had for him. But he's been asked by Scott D'Amore to do the Hall of Fame and always turned it down. And this year he couldn't because it's Chicago and it's Don West. And he couldn't, you know what I mean? He had to be the one to induct Don West. It was in Chicago where Don West grew up. It had to happen. In the minute it was announced, it was like, it's like, yeah, I understand. Why there was no choice in the matter. He had to do it, and I'm glad that Impact honored him because the way that they replaced him and the last year there was really bad, and there was a lot of bad blood. But, Mike and I have talked, and it's like the people who ran that company aren't in this company. Scott D'Amore never did anything to Mike. It was Dixie Carter and, John Gaborek. Those were the people who, made those calls, and they're not there anymore. So there's no point in, holding I don't say holding a grudge against the company.
All right, guys, we're going to wrap up this week's episode right here because I know you got a lot more wrestling to watch this weekend, including Wrestle Dream tonight.
Very, very glad.
Raw tomorrow, I have another event I have to attend for my radio job. However,
Canada for sure, because
I think I might order the replay
really
Wrestle Dream. We'll see. Brian's
wrap up
been
with
fantastic.
The big news that came out of Impact Wrestling after
one of almost everything on the McGuireShow.com, the Team MOW shop. Great supporter of the show.
Of total nonstop action, TNA wrestling. There was a big skit
I'll see what I can bang out here. And don't forget, you can take part in daily conversation on Facebook. Look for the Team MOW McGuire on Wrestling Facebook page. There's some great members there.
And they
some great
unveiled that
chatter
they're going back to calling themselves TNA. Now, this was a name
it don't cost
that when it first came out, I mean, again, this is a
as always, my friend, thank you for listening and letting me do what I do.
Wrestling fans scoffing and rolling their eyes like, really, TNA?
Yeah.
I think we live in
it was an attempt to get attention. I don't really think it worked. I think it gave it kind of a secondary sideshow feel, which, it was at first. It really was.
Yeah.
As far as going back, I mean, the name is a name. I don't think that the name change helps or hurts. It's just a move that they made. When they made the move away from the TNA name, I thought that it was important to do that because the TNA name was really negative at that point in time in most people's eyes. But now, because of nostalgia, that name's not negative. People go look back at TNA and go, AJ Styles, Kurt Angle, you know what I mean? It's like, it's not a negative. They forget those last couple of years on Destination America and all those places where they were just going down, 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 and they were on the verge of going out of business every other week, it seemed like, or every other taping.
Right.
And that those days are over. They're on solid footing with Anthem. So as far as going back to the name, I don't think it's a negative. I mean, I don't think it's a big positive. It's just kind of like a decision that Scott made, or Scott made with other people, and it's fine. It's fine. I know some people will go that TNA name is a negative name, but at this stage, the name dates back over 20 years, so it's kind of like it's just an established name in wrestling that I know. I mean, we know it's supposed to mean T&A, and the thing with that is, of course, obviously now with wrestling, so different than it was then. I mean, that kind of stuff would be considered so demeaning now, but now it just means total nonstop action. It doesn't mean what it originally was supposed to mean. So it's fine.
And I was going to bring that up too. I think we live in a world where even that phrase comes to me as a very 70s, 80s sort of phrase.
Very much so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that don't even get the connotation, and we're not going to go into it here. So either way, Dave, thank you as always for your time on this. I look forward to seeing what happens in the next little while here on all sides. I think that all companies are kind of going through a bit of a metamorphosis right now. And, for AEW,
the whole sports business world is going through a metamorphosis because of the change in, the television and streaming and everything like that. Everyone is, including WWE.
Yeah.
So the next, we've been talking about for a while, AEW kind of was able to, or their situation kind of went on hold when they got renewed for the 1 year extra, basically the option year. So the big negotiations are still going on, and they're big. Their whole future depends on these negotiations, whether it comes to streaming on Max, whether it comes to how many pay-per-views, whether it comes to how much their rights fees are. Everything. This next deal is by far the biggest thing ever with AEW and WWE. They're not make or break. They're in great shape. They're super profitable. But, as far as their stock price goes, I mean, look, we don't know what days of the week they're going to be on. I mean, I can't imagine SmackDown staying on Friday, but it's possible. Nick Khan has already said Raw doesn't have to stay on Monday. NXT is going to be out there. I mean, I largely expect one of those shows to move to Wednesday, which then means what happens to AEW, because I don't think AEW can go head to head with them. So we're going to see a musical chairs game going at the end of next year. We're going to be seeing, I think, big changes.
Well, and don't forget to throw in the mix. We'll talk about this more next week, but Billy Corgan announcing a deal with somebody, and a lot of people are suspecting it could be the CW. So, it's the one thing we're all asking for, Dave, is more wrestling on TV to watch. That's what we're really hoping.
Well, I mean, we're already oversaturated, and the reason we know that is because of the Rampage and Collision numbers not being that big. It's like people have a limit to how much wrestling they're going to watch in a week, and we are way above that level, and shows suffer for that reason.
Dave, before we go, what are some things people can read about in the last edition of the Wrestling Observer newsletter?
Well, I had a big career story on Sting, going through the whole career, all places and everything like that. Did a story on, actually 2 stories, different ones, as far as, the Vince McMahon story. Went in detail with that one, went in detail with the television rights, talking about NASCAR, talking about NBA, talking about how all this affects wrestling, the different things that we just talked about today, and more detail on that. And, just the rest of the news, as far as like what's going forward and everything like that. But that was, story on Billy Howard, who was a story on some of the big shows, covering all the big shows all over the world, as always. So yeah, there's a lot, every week, look, I'm doing 40,000 words a week. Every week there's big stuff. And, especially when you talk about international, they had a great show freaking at Arena Mexico a week ago Friday, man, that was awesome. And, but there's stuff like that every weekend. I mean, we're very blessed that we can see so much great wrestling. Some people try to deny it, that it's all terrible. I don't understand how you do that, because we see more great wrestling than we've ever had a chance to see, thanks to streaming. Streaming is not a bad thing. It's a great thing. And wrestling's healthy economically too. So that's not bad either. It's, but there's growing pains, and there's a lot of product, and like everything, there's going to be things that go by the wayside. And the reality of wrestling going forward is it's going to be the future of wrestling is not wrestling fans supporting a product or not supporting product. Future of wrestling is decision makers on television and streaming, and where they're positioning things and how much money they want to earmark for them. And that's going to determine, the next 10 years of the business. That's exactly it. Well, Dave, again, thank you as always for being here to talk a little bit about it. And again, enjoy the week, my man. We'll talk to you next week. Okay, have a great week.
McGuire on wrestling.
So full disclosure, I think you're getting this show in its best form now. I think it's really starting to get its way around, and honestly, part of it is just my return to full-time professional broadcasting. That was honestly something that was kind of lingering in the back of my mind, and now that I'm there, I realize just how much I love sharing conversations with you and also your opinions when it comes to different things. This week, talking all about what just happened last night, and that is the announcement that Impact Wrestling is going to be changing its name back to TNA Wrestling. Now, you might as well go ahead and start calling it TNA again now, because it doesn't matter when you start. But what I was wondering was from you, what your feelings are towards TNA coming back in 2023 as a brand. A lot of times TNA was slagged on for being the less than company, the place that WWE wrestlers would go to lose their gimmick names and get a salary in the hopes of eventually getting hired back with WWE. In some ways, people say the same thing about AEW these days, but now with TNA reclaiming its title, I guess, its birthright, maybe. I don't know, that might be a little dramatic, but wanted to know what you thought about it. So some great feedback came in on the Facebook page, and this isn't limited to just stuff I post too, guys. We're going to talk about some other things that you put up throughout this week here, but I wanted to start with this one. And we're going to start with comments as they came in. The first one came from Mike McGuire, who had some great points here. He says, as I recall, the company changed the name when they had a lot of baggage they wanted to leave behind, but they also have a lot of great history. The pre-Bischoff period, and it's great to see them lean back into that history. A roster of names like AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, Kurt Angle, Motor City Machine Guns, Eric Young, Beer Money Inc., Christian Cage. I bet he lists like half the roster here, but he does include names like Christopher Daniels, Sting, and the Dudleys, or Team 3D as we knew them. They also had some WWE vets, but they had a lot of young, hungry, relative unknowns eager to prove they belong on the big stage. The X Division was the most exciting thing in wrestling, with the company providing solid content once again. It's great they feel they can celebrate what once made them so special to begin with. That is a great way to look at it, Mike. That's a great way to look at it, remembering the good. And on this show, sometimes I get teased for it because I like to celebrate the good. I don't like to linger in the bad. But let's face it, when the bad is bad, it's bad. Brian Firth, a great supporter of the show. Again, I think he's collecting every t-shirt that we make at McGuireShow.com for both shows here. But Brian says, I think it's a good thing because they can really go back with their legacy and history books and talk about the wrestlers they've passed on through and continue to pave their way. But in a negative, I think they shouldn't switch back and forth with the name. So they should stick with one, and I think TNA is a more recognizable one compared to Impact Wrestling. TNA did get recognized. It did get recognizable to a degree. It was a weird time. The early 2000s, they first started as NWA TNA, remember, with the weekly pay-per-views you had to buy? $10 a week for that, man. And I think Patreon's expensive. You know what I mean? Anyway, great point there, but they did have kind of a mixed-up legacy then, and then they were always changing the logo and the title belts and the ring even, right? And some people are saying, six-sided ring. If it's not there, I'm not seeing TNA wrestling. I don't know if I agree with that because there were a lot of wrestlers that were happy that they got rid of that six-sided ring. There's not as much give in those. And let's face it, these are people putting their bodies on the line. So we'll see what happens. Joe Aguinaldo, the man, he says, for me, it's a good news, bad news thing. Good news because TNA does have some good history. Bad news because TNA has some not so good history. Personally, I was never into either brand, but whenever I hear TNA, I tend to initially think of the not-so-good period. So in that light, I'm going to lean towards it not being the best decision. However, I'm willing to see where this goes. That is Filipino positivity right there, Mr. Aguinaldo. Martin, who's never one to leave us wondering what he's thinking. I love this. For me, I see it as a positive. Right now, they are too much of a secret in pro wrestling, and if it wasn't for AEW's existence, I think more people would be watching them right now. So maybe with this return to the original name, it's going to help them create some sort of a buzz and get more fans to check them out again. That's the thing too, guys, right? Nostalgia is huge again. Nostalgia, we figured out for a while now. Why are there more action figures being put out of wrestlers in the 80s and 90s than there are in present day? Because nostalgia sells. All right? Even doing this show, the logo I made, that was a very, very key ingredient in this, was I wanted to come up with something that could speak specifically to what I wanted to do as a wrestling show, and that is this. That is a throwback to Ed Whalen's Pro Wrestling Plus, and it was a chance to do just that. So for me, there were a few fans out there that recognized that, and they saw that right away. But nostalgia sells, and I think that the TNA switch could be a good idea here, just like Martin does. Devin, however, says, I mainly recall bad history with TNA outside of the X Division and Joe versus Angle. Well, when Kurt Angle showed up, that was the next level of his career. And maybe Kurt Angle shows up in the new TNA. Probably not to wrestle, but maybe he shows up in a different way. Either way, there is a history there of some great matches, some great history. I think one of my favorite TNA moments in watching that company, obviously, there was the craziness between Angle and Abyss, right? With the somersault dive off the stage and everything else. But honestly, one of my favorite moments in TNA history has to be that showdown when Samoa Joe and Kurt Angle are face to face, the headbutt happens, and kaboom, TNA's on the map. I also liked Angle's Impact theme music. I'm a Tom Cochran fan, a Red Rider fan, so the fact that Mark Brecka worked it out, the trademark, John Cena's pal, and did that theme, that was always a cool theme. But that's just some of your thoughts on the TNA name change flip from Impact Wrestling coming up this January. Another thing I saw, some people were thinking a CM Punk might be showing up because it's in Chicago. I don't think that if Punk goes anywhere, it's going to be somewhere smaller. Do you know what I mean? And that's not a knock on Impact, because Impact, by the sounds of things, they're going to start getting into bigger buildings now. Why wouldn't you? You've been selling out venues all over the place. But I think if Punk goes anywhere, it's going to be to get a payday and get some prestige and maybe get out. End this thing on a high note if you're going to end it. And then I found this interesting. This is something on the Facebook page from Devin. He says, this is random, but I'm wondering if this is happening to anyone else. Has anyone's Facebook algorithm been recommending random posts from wrestling pages that you haven't liked? Yeah, that happens a lot. Especially since I launched this show now. Holy. But then again, I also have a lot of wrestlers that are friends of mine, so they probably go to some of those pages. Then I have a lot of you that are wrestling fans that are friends of mine, so you probably go to those pages. And frankly, they're probably paying for a lot of those spots too. So that could be the answers there. Last but not least, shout out to our friend Matthew Smith. Matthew, when Joe and I were doing Tuesday Morning Cooked all the time, he would always find everything I ever alluded to on anything, whether it came to YouTube, past bits of mine, radio stuff, whatever. And he'd always share it. So Matthew is also a very big proponent of Shane McMahon as the best of the world. And he posted a photo of Declan McMahon, who is Shane's football-playing son. You saw him on Raw a couple weeks ago. He had the spinner belt with his football team's logo in the middle. And he posted this photo from Fightful of Declan holding up the WWE Universal Roman Reigns belt on one shoulder and his football spinner belt on the other. And I'm just like, I don't know why, but you know how everybody used to say that X-Pac heat was a thing where you just see him and you want him to go away? See, I never bought into X-Pac heat. I am buying into Declan McMahon heat. I'm just, go ahead, come after me. That's okay. I don't care. Declan McMahon, I'm sure you're a great kid. I'm sure you're awesome on the football field. But every time I see you, like I'm finding Logan Paul less annoying. So, but whatever, keep it coming, dude. And everybody, thank you again for spreading the word. We had a huge spike in listenership last week, and I'm guessing it's because of your help and maybe getting the word out, because just doing what we do here. And we're going to do it next week. And next week's show, a lot of it going to be recorded down in Calgary, because I'm going to be there for Dungeon Wrestling this Friday night, where we now have a new main event, a relative newcomer on the scene. The Mighty Locumbo is now going to be in the main event, taking on the Masterpiece. Chris Masters making his return. This main event, a sub for Nick Aldis, who, of course, is now the new WWE Friday Night SmackDown general manager. So he's booked on Friday nights, but there's been no announcement that he's done by any means. So that's something interesting to look out for. And, of course, Harry Smith, who was also supposed to be in the main event, is still out with injury after that appendicitis and diverticulitis attack. So, again, all the best going out to Harry. Had the chance to message with Nick back and forth really quick after he got the job at WWE. He is loving life. Everybody's proud of him. Everybody's proud of everybody. This has been a slice, as always. Again, spread the word. If you can pick up a t-shirt, cool. If you just want to be here by hitting subscribe, thank you. Until next week, thanks for listening and letting me do what I do. Play safe, drive safe. I've seen ya.